Hello. Today we're going to start Chapter 24, Lesson 1, about World War One. So first of all, notice there are 5 lessons, so it's a little bit longer, although we will combine the last 2 into one session. Also, make sure you're noticing dates. This is one of the times I'm going to ask you to know the dates of World War One and when the United States did join in, okay? All right, so we will come back to the map later. So first of all, on this page, you will see I have the words Maine written on the side here. That is for an acronym that will help you remember the causes or the things that led to World War One. Okay, so there are 4 main, reasons. So they are militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And your book does not do them in order, so I just wanted to point them out first so you can see. So interestingly enough, there was one particular incident that kind of sparked the starting of the war, and that was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The world looked a little bit different back then. Austria-Hungary was combined, Austria and Hungary, and there was a big empire. And their leader, or the person who's going to be taking over soon, Ferdinand, was visiting a city called Sarajevo, which is in Bosnia. And this was an area that was controlled by the Austrian-Hungary Empire. There's a lot of tension in that area because there were Serbs, a group that thought that they should be separate and have their freedom. Okay, so there's a lot of conflicts. And so anyway, this leader was killed. We'll get to that in a second. And that set off, because of all of the alliances that are happening, other countries getting involved. Okay, so here's how it really works. So the 4 things are, like, one of them is nationalism, which is what I was just referring to about. Nationalism is the idea of really having strong feelings of loyalty and trying to show it off to everyone else. So many countries were doing that, trying to flex their power. And the other thing is there were ethnic groups who are also trying to fight for their rights and saying that they should have their own country. And so that's what I was mentioning before that was happening in Austria-Hungary, having a lot of Serbs wanting to, kind of revolt against them. Okay, so nationalism is one thing that's happening. Not only there, but also with all the countries kind of flexing and trying to think, show off that they're the best, or and so everyone's kind of tense. Okay. The other thing is the I in Maine, imperialism. Your book does not call it that in this paragraph, so that's why I wrote it at the top there. We've been talking so much about imperialism, their description should make sense to you, right? That other countries are expanding all over the globe, trying to build up and get colonies for themselves and make these empires, and they're doing it, right, for new markets and getting raw materials, right? We talked about those things before, and having places for their naval bases, right? So there's a lot of competition going on between the different countries, and that's going to lead to tension too. Okay, so that's the second reason. Third reason is the M in Maine, militarism. Okay, so as things are tense and everyone's competing against each other, the different countries are building up their militaries, right? And as one neighbor builds up their military, the other competing countries are going to feel like they also need to build up their military, right? So it keeps building. So we're talking both like armies and navies, okay? So that's happening all over, but the major countries. And then the 4th thing, the A in Maine, alliances. Okay, so what happens was an alliance, right, is when you agree to work with another country and like you'll come to their aid, right? If they get attacked, we promise we'll help you, right? And so what ended up happening is a lot of the different countries started buddying up and making these alliances. There are two major ones that were leading us into World War One. There was one called the Triple Alliance, which is Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. And then there was another one called the Triple Entente. Entente is just a fancy word meaning like an agreement. And the Triple Entente was Great Britain, France, and Russia. Okay, so they had these alliances that said, don't worry, we have your back. If anyone attacks you, we'll help you. All right, the idea, they thought that this was going to help prevent war because everyone will know, like, oh, don't bother to attack them because, they have these friends, right? And they thought that having these friends would make people not attack. Well, what ended up happening, though, is once someone does get in a disagreement, then the other ones are like bound to help, right? And so it drags in a lot more countries because of these alliances. So that's what ends up happening. It was very tense even before the war started, that everyone kind of felt that this was a bad situation. And so where the spark that happens that really sets it all off was in an area called the Balkans. In the Balkans, which it's a peninsula. They call it the Balkan Peninsula, and they call it the Balkans for short. There, like I said, there was a lot of unhappiness by the Slavs. Okay, so the Slavic people. There's a lot of Slavic people who live in Serbia, which is right next door. Okay, and the Serbs are like encouraging the Slavic people to want their independence from Austria-Hungary. And so that's been happening, that nationalist feeling, right? The feeling that that ethnic group should be able to have their freedom. And there's a lot of controversy. Well, unfortunately, Gavrilo Princip, he was a member of a nationalist group, a Serbian nationalist group, and he plots the murder of Franz Ferdinand and his wife. They were in Sarajevo, and they got killed while, you can see in the picture there, assassinated while in their car. And of course, Austrian Hungaries are very mad, and they blame Serbia, even though, Gavrilo Princip acted, he wasn't acting on behalf of the country of Serbia, but they're kind of, held as to blame, and there's been a lot of tension because of all this nationalist feeling of the Slavs, right? So anyway, basically, to make a long story short, Austria-Hungary blames Serbia. They basically make unreasonable demands, and Serbia can't do it. And so they declare war on Serbia, knowing that they have their friend Germany to back them up in this, okay? So what ends up happening is all the alliances get triggered. So Serbia is going to get attacked by Austria-Hungary and therefore also Germany. Well, Serbia has a deal with Russia, okay? So then Russia is going to be in it. So now we have other big countries being, even though the smaller ones, Austria-Hungary and Serbia, were having the original problem, now we also have Germany and Russia getting drawn in, okay? And then, so Germany goes ahead and declares war on Russia, which is interesting, right? Because they weren't even the original people. And they decide there's also, of course, a lot bigger story to it, right? Germany has been feeling like they don't like being kind of hemmed in on both sides by France and Russia, and they really do want to like expand their empire and their nationalism. So they're taking this as like an opportunity, right? Okay, so Germany declares war on Russia and then on France. Germany had wants to go directly and attack France first. They decide because Russia is not ready to go to war. They need time to ready their forces and what they call mobilize. And so since they know that they're not quite ready, they go ahead and attack the other side, France. And so I'm saying sides because when you look at the map, Germany, they call it the Eastern Front and the Western Front. And so they knew they were going to have to fight a war on both sides, right? Both of their borders, basically, Germany. And so they know that they can wait a little on Russia. They're hoping to go conquer France quickly and then put all of their troops back over on the Russian side, because that will be hard eventually. Okay. So they think, okay, well, we're going to demand that we get to go through Belgium. France has some good fortifications on the southern part, but if they go up north through Belgium, they can kind of go around that and get into France that way. And they think they can, just make Belgium give in and go through there. Belgium surprises them and does not say, yes, you can come through, and they put up a fight, and that really helps. But once Belgium is invaded, then they go in by force. Germany goes through Belgium, and then Belgium has a deal with Great Britain. So now Great Britain is brought into the war to protect Belgium, and also because they're worried about what if Germany takes over, right, this whole region, and what that could mean for them. So then now they're going to war with Germany too, Great Britain. So everyone gets drawn in. Okay, so when the war starts in 1914, by the way, they did not call it World War I at that point. They don't know there's going to be a two, right? So they just called it the Great War at that point. And so once the war starts, the what were alliances now become like actual battle groups, right? And the sides shift a little bit. So once the war starts, now we start calling them the Allied powers or allies, which is Great Britain, France, and Russia mostly. And I will say that the book is acting like it's only these major countries. These are the major countries, but honestly, all of Europe gets drawn into it, and there's a lot of other places that people don't realize fought in the war because they end up being colonies of, let's say, Britain and stuff. So the main ones were the Allies were Great Britain, France, and Russia. And then the Central Powers, they call them, are Germany, Austria-Hungary, and then the Ottoman Empire, which is Turkey, Turkish people, right? Their empire is larger than Turkey, though. They join in on the Austria-Hungary, Germany side, okay? So those are the main ones. And then during the war, some sides changed. Like Italy, because of its alliance with Germany, should have gone in on the Central Power side. However, they decide not to. They don't think it's in their best interest, so they do not honor the alliance. And then that following year, in 1915, they join the other side, the Allies. Okay. Japan also gets involved, even though they are not directly like in that region, right? Europe. They are, remember, having all these competitions for power and colonies, and they are seeing the Germans as their rival. And so they get involved on the other side, hoping to, get rid of their rival. Okay, so the Germans enter in on the Japanese on the Allies. Okay, so I think it would help you if you make some notes for yourself, trying to understand, like, before the war, who was on what alliances, and then after the war starts, who's on the Allies and who's on the Central Powers. Okay, and like I said, it's actually much bigger than this. Like, for instance, like Australia, New Zealand, places like that, Canada, right? They fought in the wars too, and even places in Central America, because that's where the colonies were, right? Like Great Britain has colonies of Canada and Australia and New Zealand, right? And so those places, there's people fought in the war too, but the book is only focusing on the main countries. So just so you know, there are a lot. That's why it's called World War, because it really is almost everybody gets drawn in eventually. Okay. All right. So like I said, there's two fronts they're going to fight on. The Western Front, like I just already mentioned, Germany invades Belgium to get to France. Um, and the Belgians are much smaller, right, and shouldn't be able to put up a fight, but they do. They try really hard and they hold them back for about 3 weeks. And that's enough time for France and Britain to get mobilized and to get a better defense. So that really actually really helped their side, right, the Allies. They did, of course, eventually Germans overcome the Belgian and they get into France. And then there's a really big famous battle called the Battle of the Marne, between the Germans, and now the British and the French are there to help try to stop them, and they are able to stop them from advancing any further. And the reason that battle is pretty famous is because it's really proving that this is not going to be a quick war, and they're going to put up a harder fight than the Germans thought. Right? Remember how the Germans thought they were going to be able to, get France pretty quickly and then just move everything over to focusing on Russia. Well, that doesn't really happen. The Western Front fighting takes much longer. They have 3 years of fighting and they move back and forth and get a little bit of land, but not by a lot. So they call it like basically a stalemate where neither side was winning. And even though they made little moves back and forth, no one's the clear winner. Okay. This is years of trench warfare. We've talked about that before, right? That trenches are kind of these big dug under the ground, right? Remember we talked about this, how men can stand in them for shelter and then they can shoot out. I have a graphic I'll show you, which shows that you would dig a series of trenches and then in between there, it's called no man's land. And then on the other side, right, is the your enemy is doing the same thing. And you both have barbed wire and shells that you've made it so it's really dangerous to try to cross, and it's hard to get over to the other side's trenches. And they had, huge, big artillery that would shoot these huge shells into that to, make it so that people won't try to cross. Okay, so anyway, so that's basically what the warfare is like at this time. So there's a couple other famous battles. Battle of Verdun is a big one. It was a really terrible, bloody battle where a lot of people were killed. They mention here about 750,000 soldiers died in that one battle, which is terrible in France. Also, there's the Battle of the Somme, which is again a terrible battle. Both of those, each side is trying to launch these offensives to try to push the other ones back and to gain more land in the war. Okay, but again, a lot of casualties with not a lot of gain. Okay, one of the interesting things about World War I is the new weaponry that's coming out during this war. So that, and sadly, is making a lot more deaths than in previous wars. Like I mentioned, those really big artillery can fire the shells much farther. And also they have better rifles, more accuracy fighting in the rifles. They show you up there, there's like machine guns in the picture. Poison gas was one of the major things. The Germans started it, and then, of course, it was effective. So then the Allies also developed poison gas, so that, they could be, equal in the fighting. And then you can see from the picture that they all started wearing gas masks then to negate that. Even the horses there you see in the picture, they made gas masks for them. So there's tanks you can see in the picture there too. There's armored tanks is a new thing. They built them originally because you could, they would crush the barbed wire. They could get across the no man's land more safely, right, and withstand the shelling. And you could crush down and get over the barbed wire without hurting people, and then people could follow it and get across no man's land. So both sides made tanks. Airplanes become a thing, right? And they start using them for a variety of things. One, reconnaissance right, reporting how the opposite side is moving their troops. They actually did bomb, actually literally like carry the bomb and drop it literally. There were some that had guns in their plane and they would fight up in the sky. They called it dogfighting. And then they even had, oh, by the way, here's the Red Baron, who's one of the most famous pilots during that time. If you watched the Peanuts, Snoopy, right? He's always fighting the Red Baron, right? Um, and then there's also a Zeppelin, right? A blimp was a new thing the Germans made that they could use to go bomb the cities of their enemy. And also submarines. What they called them U-boats, or we called them U-boats. The real word is Unterseeboot, which is German for basically for submarine. And that was the U-boats were very effective because remember, one of the things we do besides fighting on land, remember every battle we talked about how they do a lot of blockading, right? And how wars at sea are really important. And the Germans were very hurt by the blockade that the British Navy put in, and they had a lot of shortages. And so the Germans' response to that was to develop the submarine, which would be able to go undetected and attack the British ships and kind of break this blockade and hurt the other side. And that's actually what ends up bringing us into the war, the United States, is these attacks. We'll talk about that next time.